All right, looks like we're live. Okay, hi, I'm Pam Fox. Welcome to my Bible study. Um, Once again, I'm just really excited to be here, really thankful to be here, studying the Word of God, sharing my Bible study. What we've been doing is going through the book of Leviticus. We're in chapter 20. And what I've been doing is showing what I see as patterns. Remember in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 11 through 13, we read that these things, that is, these Old Testament, ancient scriptures, stories, they were written down for our admonition, is what it says. They were written down as patterns for our admonition. So the stories and the context here is talking about Moses, it's talking about creation, it's talking about the Exodus, it's talking about what we're studying, which is the Levitical law. It was all written down, it says in Corinthians, as examples. This word is ensemble and it means a pattern or a blueprint. And so what we have are stories being written down as a blueprint or a pattern. Okay? They're written down as a blueprint or a pattern. And what we know about a pattern is it's just a foundational representation of something that is real to come. Okay? The blueprint or the pattern is simply foundational. It's the beginning, right? We find the beginnings of the real thing here in the foundation. And we have the fulfillment. I don't know if I spelled that right. We have the fulfillment here of what's foundational here. And then, of course, we have a thread that connects the two. The stories were written down as patterns for our admonition unto the end of the world. So these Old Testament stories were written down as patterns. They were foundational, and then they thread through the Bible, and then they are fulfilled eventually in Christ. So an example of this, a great example of this, is the Passover lamb. There in the night before the nation of Israel walked out of captivity in Egypt, God told them to take this lamb into their households, this perfect lamb, for 3 days, and then kill it and paint its blood over their door. And then the spirit of death would come across the whole nation of Egypt. And if they had that atoning blood over their door, then the firstborn in that household would not die, but everyone else, every other firstborn would. Okay? So we have the foundations or the pattern. I mean, this was a real story, but there's a pattern within it. There's a blueprint, a beginning, a foundation in this first Passover lamb that would later be fulfilled in Christ when he hung on the cross and he poured out his atoning blood. This blood back here saved the lives of the firstborn people, and so does the blood of Christ. It covers sin and it saves the lives of God's children. So this is an example of a pattern that's fulfilled later in Christ. Another example that actually was just brought to my attention this morning is the pattern of the tabernacle. So foundationally, we have the tabernacle of Moses, right, which was a tent. And this was what God, he gave them the blueprint of this, told them to erect this tent, and it was meant to be the house of God. There in the wilderness, there in the desert, it was the place God could come and dwell among them. But it was a tent in the middle of a camp of other tents where God came and dwelt in a tent, which is temporary. Okay? We have a thread here because later when Jesus would come, in John, we're told that the Word, which is Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us, or tabernacled among us is actually the word that's used there. Jesus fulfilled this because in his first coming, he came, he tabernacled among us, and he was in an earth suit, just like our earth suits. God lived in a tent, just like everyone else lived in a tent, and Jesus came and lived in an earth suit, just like everyone else lived in an earth suit. That is, these temporary bodies, right? And so there was a fulfillment in that at his incarnation, his first coming, the miracle of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. So there was a fulfillment in Jesus, even of this tent, this temporary tent. And we have actually another pattern that is yet to be fulfilled. This is the tabernacle of Moses. Later became the temple of Solomon, which wasn't a tent, it was a temple. It was a brick and mortar building, which is representative of non-temporariness, right? It's permanentness, which obviously it wasn't literally permanent because it doesn't still stand today. But the contrast here is a tent and a brick and mortar building. Also, this was a very humble, meager, it was a tent. This was grand. It was brilliant. It was golden. It was large. It was shiny. It was glorious. Okay. And we have a thread here as well where Jesus at his second coming will begin his millennial reign, right? That 1,000-year reign. And during that time, Jesus comes back not to live in a temporary earth suit, but he comes back in his permanent resurrection body. So he is going to fulfill this temple of Solomon when he returns at his second coming. And he's coming back for good, right? He comes back and he fulfills this 1,000-year reign, but he doesn't leave. He's back for good. When that 1,000-year reign ends, the day of God begins, and Jesus is still here for all of it, for eternity. When Jesus returns, he's coming back for good. Okay, so we see that represented in the blueprint here of the Temple of Solomon. So I just wanted to get the Bible study started with that today because, once again, we're going to be in the book of Leviticus, and we're going to be looking at what it says there in chapter 20 and how we can see that it's foundational to something that's coming in the end, to the end times. And we can create those threads by identifying and recognizing what I call, just words or phrases that we see both in Leviticus and in Revelation. So this is what we've been looking at in this study. And today is going to be the same, more of the same. We're in Leviticus 20, and there were several, words and phrases that were there in Leviticus 20 and in Revelation 20 and other places in the end time story, which is the book of Revelation, which I just think is really amazing. It's just really cool. So what I'm going to do today is we are going to go through the entire chapter of Leviticus 20. And as we go, when we stumble upon, for example, a word that I find both in Leviticus 20 and Revelation 20, we're just going to talk about it. It's a little bit different than what we did last week. That's the way we're going to do it today. So let's get started. All right, Leviticus 20, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, now remember, almost every chapter in this book begins with this. God is talking to Moses, and he's telling them, this is what I want you to tell my children. This is how I want them to live. Remember, they've been brought out of Egypt, which is the only life they've ever known, which was a life of worshiping multiple gods, a life of, religious ceremonies and cultural rituals, all of that stuff. It was their culture. And God brought them out of that and into the wilderness, and he wants them to unlearn all of that. He wants them to quit those cultural practices, rituals, ceremonies, religiousness. He wants to bring them into the wilderness and say, I'm your God. I'm going to tell you how I want you to live. And if you do what I say, this is what will happen. And if you don't do what I say, this is what will happen. So he's laying it out very plainly for this group of people. And there are multiple warnings, like you've got to do what you're told, or it's not going to go well for you. In fact, it's going to go very badly for you. And there's a lot of detail, which is what we're going to see today. This entire chapter is going to focus not so much on what not to do or what to do. It's going to kind of revisit a lot of the things that God has already told them about that. But in today's chapter, God is going to talk about the consequences. This is what happens if you commit adultery. This is what happens if you dishonor your mother and father. This is what happens if you sacrifice your child to the Molech, god of the Ammonites. And spoiler alert, what happens, the consequence for these things in this chapter is going to be, we're going to see three different things that all kind of amount to the same thing. So what we're going to be looking at are the consequences, consequences, which are basically outcomes, or in this case, they're sentencings, right? You have your day in court, sentencings. You have your day in court, the judge finds you guilty, and so what's going to happen? You're going to have a sentence, right? You're going to pay a fine, you're going to go to jail, you're going to get the chair, whatever it is, you're going to be sentenced. So this chapter talks about this. It talks about the consequences, and these consequences aren't mild. In fact, I would call them pretty severe. I think most of us would call them severe. In other words, it's not like, pay a fine or spend a year in jail. The consequences are going to be things like death, being cut off, which we'll talk more about, and dying childless. All right, so almost every chapter in this book of Leviticus starts out with the Lord spake unto Moses saying, tell my children this, tell Israel that, tell the nation this. And that's how this one starts out as well. Verse 2, again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Moloch, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. So this is basically saying if you're a member of the nation of Israel, or if you just live in the nation of Israel and you're a Gentile, or a foreigner, basically God is saying, all of you here in this group, Gentile or Jew, I am talking to you, whosoever giveth any of his seed unto Moloch. Okay, so let's start a list here. This is talking about the seed unto Moloch. This Moloch, when we look it up in the Strongs, we'll see it's a deity or an Ammonite god, that is lowercase g god. And again, they're being brought out of Egypt, a place where there were cultural customs. And what God is kind of systematically going through, kind of line by line, some of these different things are the things that took place in Egypt. And they're the things that are taking place in Canaan / Israel, which isn't where they're at. They're in the desert, but the idea is that they want to get back home to Canaan / Israel. And we're going to see that God is going to cast those people out, the Canaanites, before Israel marches in, because they're committing several of these things that we're reading about, these abominations, these rebellious acts that are anti-God, that are against God, that go against who God is, what boundaries he has set up, what laws he has set up. They go against all of that. So this is the first one here in chapter 20. It's this idea of really a child sacrifice is what it is. And actually the Bible talks about this Moloch in a number of places, sacrifice in the Bible, this Moloch, this deity, this God, and that they would, that God says, don't sacrifice your children to Moloch. And extra biblically, we know, because the Bible isn't the only historical document, there are other historians all throughout time, going back to these ancient times, that would document these things. So extra biblically, we know that there was a religious ritual of satanic child sacrifice. And it was unspeakable. It was, I'm not even going to talk about it. It was horrific. It was an awful thing that was part of their culture. And God says, don't do it. He says, if you do it, here in the nation, my children, the nation of Israel, he says, surely you shall be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. Now, what we're going to start to have an understanding of in terms of who God is and how he operates is that the consequences or the sentencings for some of these things are severe. And this one is one where you would go, okay, that sounds good. They're sacrificing their children. Yeah, they should be killed. There's going to be some other ones where you might go, oh, that seems kind of harsh. Gosh, they were just doing this or they're just doing that. Like maybe cursing your mother and father. We're going to see that the punishment for that is death as well. Just keep in mind that what God is doing here is establishing a society where people honor and obey their maker, their God, who says, do this, don't do this, don't do that. And he's set up severe consequences because in God's providence, these are a big deal. And if we just let this stuff go and poo-poo it and gloss over it, eventually you have a society that's more and more and more and more corrupt. And that's what God is trying to get away from. When these people, which is what it said, the people of the land have to engage in this public stoning, right? This guy has sacrificed his child to Moloch. He's been found guilty. They march him out. Extra biblically, what I know about this is they would take them out to a place where there'd be kind of a little hill or a cliff and a lot of stones there. And they'd each pick up a stone and start throwing it at this person until they either fell down or fell over the side, or if they fell down, they'd push them over the side and continue to throw rocks at this person. And they might die down there from being stoned, or they might just die eventually of bleeding to death, and being buried by these stones, or they might die eventually just laying in the desert of dehydration. It was a horrible way to die. And these people they were commanded to engage in this. The people had to take part of it. And I don't know if every single person in the nation, I don't know how 1 million people could go out and throw stones at a person. So I'm not really sure how they did that. But the people that would participate in this, I'm assuming that they would understand that this sacrifice to Molech that God said don't do is a really big deal. And now we're killing this guy for doing it. And maybe, as an individual, these people would think, I'm never going to do that because this consequence is brutal. And that's the idea of enforcing a law, right? We want to let people know that there's a severe consequence to breaking the law for committing a gruesome crime, to try to dissuade people from doing those things in the first place. So when you start to kind of read this and study it, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. Even though there's a part of you that might think, oh God, you're so harsh. For example, we're going to talk here in a minute about honoring the mother and the father. That is cursing your mother and father. It was one of the commandments, right? And the punishment we're going to see is another severe punishment if you're found guilty of this. And so just think about it. Think about the ripple effects when you start to allow culture and allow society to not respect their parents, right? Down the line, after a few generations, what you start to have is a society of people that are raised up, not being taught to honor their parents, to respect their grandparents, to respect their elders. And so what you have is a very unruly, disrespectful, spoiled, nasty generation of people, which we're seeing a lot of that today. Although, there still are families that teach their children to respect, their elders and their parents, and that a lot don't. And we're seeing the negative consequence of that. And so God knows he knows what the ripple effects of that are. And so he says, don't do it. And if you do it, there's going to be a severe consequence. Now, I do want to caveat that, personally speaking for myself, and I think I can speak on behalf of most Christians aren't going around saying, let's bring back the Levitical law. The Levitical law was meant for this nation of Israel at the foundations of the nation. That's not to say God's law isn't important and it isn't true and just. It is. So nobody's saying we need to bring back, oh, you had an affair, we should kill you. Oh, you cursed your mother and father, we should kill you. No one is saying that. But it is important to understand these foundations and to understand the fulfillment, which we're going to look at in today's chapter. We're going to look at how this is just foundational to what we're going to see in the end times. All right, verse 3, and I will say, so let's go talk a little bit more about this Molech and the severity of this crime. I will set my face against that man. Okay, so 1, the punishment is death by stoning. And 2, God says he's going to set his face against that man. This, in essence, God is talking about turning his back on this man that sacrifices his child to Molech. I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people. Cut off. We've seen this before. Now, when we look at this in the Strongs, it can mean to literally destroy, cut off in that sense, just kill somebody. It can also mean to excommunicate. So it would depend on the judge in the specific, whatever the case is. Okay. To decide, the Bible says you have to be cut off, we're going to send you packing. You no longer get to be a part of this group. You got to leave. That's your sentencing. Or it might be, taken out back and stoned. So this cutoff can be literally destroyed, or it can be an excommunication, that is being cut off from the group, sent away. In this case, it says what the cutting off is. They're going to be stoned by death. So we got to look at the context, and we got to look at everything that's said within the context. I will set my face against that man and cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. Now, I think this is important. Remember when a little kid, when, he's asking his mom and dad, maybe mom and dad say this, and the child says, why? We talked about this last week, and the mom or dad says, well, because I'm your mom and I said so. Here, we almost can hear the words, why? Why does this guy who has sacrificed his seed unto Molech, God is saying he has to be cut off from among his people? Why? And the answer is in the next breath. It's in the next breath. It's because by offering up your seed to Molech, you're defiling God's sanctuary, which is his house, and you're profaning his holy name. Okay, which really gives a lot of heaviness to this crime. This child sacrifice unto Molech. It's profaning the name of God, and it's defiling his sanctuary. It's really easy to gloss over these things, but really this is a big deal. We need to take notice and go, okay, this is a big deal. This offering up a child sacrifice to Molech is a big deal. And of course, this is something, unfortunately, that it's still a satanic practice to this day. It's not something that people really talk about, but it is. And in the end times, we're going to see that all of that is going to be reconciled or rectified and brought to justice. Verse 4, if the people of the land do anyways hide their eyes from the man, we're still talking about the same man who offers up his seed to Molech. So here what it's talking, it says, when he giveth of his seed unto Molech and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go a whoring after him to commit whoredom with Molech from among their people. So this is basically talking about, we've got the man who sacrifices his child, and now we have somebody that watches it, that knows about it, and does nothing. Okay, God says even that man deserves a severe consequence. And that is that I will set my face against that man, against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go a whoring after him. Now remember this word whoring. We've looked at this before, this idea of harlotry. Okay. It's this idea of being faithful to one, right, as opposed to being spread out among many. Okay. You can be faithful to the one, or you can be spread out among many. When we talk about whoring or harlotry, we're talking about being spread out among many and not being faithful to the one. It's the same thing. The literal definition of, prostitution or harlotry is a female spreading herself out among many men, as opposed to being faithful to the one husband. But the same can be said about idolatry, that it's whoredom, that it's harlotry, because there's no faithfulness unto the one God. Instead, there's a spreading out among the many gods. And we see this a lot in ancient times, right? This whole idea of only having one God, a lot of people, it really perplexes people. Like, why would you only have one God when you could have many gods? Isn't many gods better than one God? But God comes along and says, I am the God of all things. I'm the God of you. I'm the God of the planet. I'm God of the universe. I am the one and true God. Worship me and me alone. And a lot of people found that very strange. But it's what God calls us to do, is to be faithful to him and him alone. Forget about all these other gods. And I think for most of us, some people do literally worship multiple gods, but I feel like for most of us, even people that are like minorly religious, they don't go around worship. A lot of people in today's culture, they just want no God. A lot of secularism and atheism, they just want no God. They want themselves to kind of sit on the throne. And in a sense, that is idol worship, because you're not worshiping the one true God. There's two parts to that commandment. You're supposed to worship the one true God, and you're supposed to not worship all these other gods. So it's not one or the other, it's both. So even the person who knows about this and doesn't report it, God says they're going to be found guilty as well. And we kind of have that in today's society. It's like if you're just standing by and not doing anything, yeah, you didn't commit the crime, but you didn't do or say anything. So in a sense, you're guilty as well. And that's what God is saying here. Verse 6. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul and will cut him off from among his people. So this is talking about going after after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards. This is talking about, all we have to do is go into the Strong's here and look at these words. The word wizard in the Hebrew is yidone, and it's a conjurer or a ghost. So in this case, sometimes a wizard is talking about, like a witch or a warlock. In this case, it's talking about like a person who's possessed, right? A conjurer or a ghost. If you go after a wizard or familiar spirits, it says in the Strong's, a necromancer, a ventriloquist, a bottle. Okay, and it's not talking like a modern day ventriloquist with a little dummy. Again, it's talking about demon possession here. And it's warning. God is warning this nation, don't go after these people. Like, don't hire someone to have a seance for you and that sort of thing. Stay away from that sort of thing, because it says, I will even set my face against that soul, any soul that turns to these things, and will cut him off from among his people. So again, God is being very serious and giving a very heavy, serious warning to the nation. You need to stay away from this stuff. And again, it's a lot of unlearning of what was very common in their previous culture. Child sacrifice, going after these wizards for different reasons. Okay. All right. So we have this one, and we have, going after this wizardry. Wizardry. We'll just go like that. God says, don't do that. Verse 7, sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy. We see this keeps coming up. Be holy, God says. Don't do that. Be holy. I'm holy. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And remember, this idea of sanctifying yourself means to obey God, right? So that you can be transformed to become more and more like God, who is holy. God's telling you to be holy. God is holy. He wants you to participate in the sanctification, which God does the sanctifying, but we participate in it by being obedient. And that's what he's telling them. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy. Obey me. That's how you sanctify yourselves. For I am the Lord your God, and ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord, which sanctify you. Okay, so again, obey. Sanctify yourselves. Be holy. And I will sanctify you, God says. That is, God is the one that does the sanctifying. We just participate in it by being holy or by being obedient. And all of this still applies today, by the way, because the work that Jesus did at the cross calls believers to sanctify themselves, to obey God, and to be holy. None of that has changed. Verse 9, for everyone that curseth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. Okay, so cursing your mother and father, this would be dishonoring, your parents. It's one of the commandments. Don't do that. Don't dishonor your parents. For everyone that curseth his father or mother shall be surely put to death. So again, the consequence here is death. Same thing here. The outcome the consequence, the sentence, it's death. He hath cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Okay, so now we have adultery. The sentence is death. And it's for both. Okay, it's not for one or the other, it's for both, which makes sense. You know, it takes two to tango. Now it's going to go into a lot of detail, kind of like last week's chapter did, about the different ways that you can commit adultery. Keep in mind, this first verse says, if a man committeth adultery with another man's wife, the sentence for both of them is death. Now it's going to go through some different examples, and we'll just try to get through this pretty quickly. The man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have wrought confusion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. Now, I find this interesting. All along here, it's talking about adultery and how their punishment is death. When we get down to this one, it talks about a specific case of adultery. A man takes a wife and her mother. It says it's wickedness. It says they shall burn with fire, both he and they, that there be no more wickedness among you. So I just find that interesting, because before it was talking about killing people by stoning. And now in this particular case, it says they shall be burnt with fire. And the reason I find this interesting is because this is one of our connecting words to Revelation 20. Let's look at it. Revelation 20, the final two verses in the chapter, verses 14 and 15, talk about the lake of fire. And it says, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So here we have a thread. Here we have a pattern of something that's foundational. In this particular case of adultery, we have death by fire. Okay, we're talking about adultery. Okay, and then we have in the end times, remember this is foundational. Over here in the end times, we have this lake of fire in the end times. Okay, so here I see a thread where we have God foundationally telling the people, don't do this thing. If you do, the consequence is death by fire. Okay, and then we go all the way to the end times where we see different, I like to use the word entity because it's not just people we're talking about here. Okay, who does the Bible say goes into the lake of fire? Let's look at this really quick. First is the beast and the false prophet. They're cast in first. I know they're cast in first. I might get the order wrong here, and I know who's cast in last, so we'll just try to get through all of it. So we have the beast, the false prophet, those whose names are not in the book of life from the foundation of the world, those who take the mark and worship the beast. Okay, and worship his image. They go into the lake of fire. We have Satan's rebellious angels. They go into the lake of fire. And we have death and Hades. Hang on a second. Let me pull up my notes really quick and make sure I didn't miss one. Satan. After the 1,000 years, Satan gets cast into the lake of fire. The unbelieving Oops. The unbelieving, ... Maybe we'll look at that verse, but it talks about the unbelieving, the whoremongers, the murderers, how they get cast into the lake of fire at the very end. And finally, death, which I believe is the spirit or the angel of death, and Hades, which is hell. That holding place for the dead, the bad part of it. Remember, Jesus talked about Hades and how there were two sections separated by an abyss. Okay? And there was a bad section and there was a good section. Okay? Hades. It's going to be the last thing that's thrown into the lake of fire. Remember, do you remember why it has to be thrown into the lake of fire, or why it's thrown into the lake of fire? Is because at this point, when Jesus throws Hades into the lake of fire, there will be no need for a holding place for the dead anymore ever again. Because death is no longer a thing. Therefore, there no longer needs to be a holding place for disembodied spirits. Okay. So the lake of fire is for these entities. And yes, it includes people, the unbelieving, the murderous, the whoremongers, I think we're going to look at that verse, but it's people, it's Satan and his angels, and there's a Bible verse that talks about each of these people and entities that are cast into the lake of fire and who they are and when they go in terms of being placed on a timeline. So I'm not making this stuff up, but okay, so let's get back to this. Death by fire. Here we have a pattern of an adulterer. And remember, this adultery, when we look at the word adultery, let's look at it really quick in the Hebrew. To commit adultery, to apostatize, which means to depart. It goes back to this idea of departing from being faithful to the one. Okay, so when you and I think of an adultery, we think of an affair, right? Like a married person cheats and has an affair. But this adultery on a spiritual nature, it's very much talking about the relationship of people with God. So this is a pattern, and it's prophetic, and it creates a thread to the end times where there will be those who are anti-God, who have rebelled against God, who have not remained faithful to God, and their place will be death by fire. Okay, let's keep going. There's quite a bit here about adultery. We just did verse 14. I want to go back to verse 14 because it says that there be no wickedness among you. And that actually goes with what we just talked about, because when we look at the end times and we ask the question, what's up with God and his wrath and all of the horrible things that happened during that period of time? Like, seems a little harsh. I know some people think that. I used to think that. This kind of answers the question here in Leviticus 20. If you want to know why there's going to be so much harsh penalty and severe consequence to sin in the end times, this answers it in part, that there be no wickedness among you. Jesus is going to have his 1,000 years. Awesome. And what a lot of people are missing when it comes to the plot of the end time story in the book of Revelation, right? You probably heard the saying, don't miss the plot. The plot that we're missing is that the wrath of God isn't just for an unbelieving world. That is unbelieving people. That's part of it. We just looked at the list of all those who go into the lake of fire. But God is getting his children out of the world by the millions as satanic fallen angels are filling the earth. That's the story. That's the end time story. I mean, that's part of it. And so God is consolidating all of these evil, wicked, rebellious angels and people. Anybody that wants to be anti-God and doesn't want to be a part of what he's doing, doesn't want to be a part of his family, doesn't want to receive the blessings that he's promised, doesn't want to humble themselves, doesn't want to obey their maker, God is consolidating them all in one spot. And then he pours out his wrath onto the world. Then Jesus' 1,000-year reign begins. That there will be no wickedness among you. Jesus is going to have his 1,000 years, and he gets to have it wicked free. No interruption from Satan and his demons and his minions, or unbelievers, or anti-Christians, anti-God people, Jesus haters, Christian haters. Okay? There are going to be rebellious people during the end times, unfortunately, but Jesus is going to rule with a rod of iron, which might ruffle some feathers, and I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. But Jesus, along with his co-heirs, are going to rule the earth with a rod of iron. That means enforced rulership. That means it's going to be 1,000 years of peace, but it's going to be enforced peace, right? There ain't going to be no wars, okay? No one's going to get away with crime, right? And I'm not sure if these judgments are going to come back during the 1,000 years. I think it's possible, right? Strict penalties for crimes against God. I don't know about that. But let's look at this one more time. If a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. This is a crime against God's law. It's wicked. They shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. God wants to get the wickedness out. It's what he's trying to do with this nation. Doesn't quite work out that way because they're not, ultimately, they aren't obedient. But it's foundational to everything that God is doing. Okay, so now it's going to get into some other of God's rules. Verse 15, if a man lie with the beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. Okay, guess what happens in the book of Revelation to that beast? Here in verse 15, it's saying, if a man lie with the beast, this is bestiality, right? We know what they're talking about. But foundationally, as a pattern that points to the real thing that's to come later, what's going to happen during the end times with this end times beast? People are going to worship. They're going to the beast. They're going to stand with the beast. They're going to lie down with the beast. And it says, if a man lie with the beast, he shall surely be put to death. And that's what's going to happen in the end times. The ones who honor the beast and worship its image and take that mark, okay, they're doomed. Their place is the lake of fire. The place that's prepared for them is the lake of fire. If a man lie with the beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. Okay? Let's look in the book of Revelation at what happens to that beast. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both, the beast and the false prophet, were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. So that end times beast, along with his sidekick, the false prophet, are going into the lake of fire. Along with those who are loyal to him. They'll be killed too. Verse 16, and if a woman approach unto any beast. So God is being clear here. This bestiality, guys, don't do it. Women, you don't do it either. If a woman approach unto any beast and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. This idea of your blood being upon you is like, you want it, you got it. It's on you. You asked for it, fine. You got it. Verse 17, and if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing. And they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his iniquity. So here we have an example of being cut off, which again can be meant to mean destroyed or killed, or excommunicated. I mean, the judge will decide. And if a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood. This is talking about a woman on her period. It's basically saying that a man can't have sex with a woman on her period. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. Now, don't ask me to explain this because I don't get it, so we're not even going to talk about it. But thus saith the Lord. It was important enough to God to tell the nation, don't do it. And I can think of a couple reasons why that might have been important. But again, I don't want to get into this particular one. Verse 19, and thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, nor of thy father's sister, for he uncovereth his near kin. They shall bear their iniquity. And if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, he hath uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. Now here, this is interesting to me because we know that the punishment, according to God, for adultery is death. And here it's saying, this is clearly adultery. If a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, they, that is the man and his uncle's wife, this woman, they shall bear their sin, they shall die childless. So I don't know if this is talking necessarily about you're going to die young before you have children because we're going to kill you because you committed adultery, or if it's saying in some cases they're going to be allowed to live. There's going to be mercy, they're not going to be killed, but they're going to be cursed with the inability to bear children. I don't really know. Could be one or the other. It could be both. Again, it would be up to the judge in any particular case to look at God's law and then make the decision, is how it worked. Verse 21, it talks more about the same. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. And here it doesn't even use the word die like it did in the previous verse, shall die childless. Here it says they shall be childless. So again, I think it's talking about, different outcomes for different situations. The judge gets to make the call. And they had a judicial system, right? We've already looked at that. God has kind of talked about that here in the book of Leviticus. There's the sacrificial system, there's the priestly system, there's the judicial system. God is establishing these systems within this nation of people, how he wants them to live. And a judicial system was part of it, bringing your case before the judge, laying out your evidence, telling of your defense, saying you're guilty or innocent, and then the judge basically deciding your fate based on this. Verse 22, ye shall therefore keep all my statutes. This is God talking. Ye shall therefore keep all my statutes. Remember, what we're seeing here is a contrast. Hang on a second. This chapter is really clearly laying out a contrast. We have on this side, we have sin, right? Crimes against God. And we have the outcome of this, which is death. And we know from the New Testament, we're told that the wages of sin is death, or the wages of sin are death. The outcome to breaking God's law is death. Okay? The contrast over here is obedience to God. Okay? And the outcome is holiness. Okay? Let's look at this. Ye shall therefore keep all my statutes, obey, and all my judgments, and do them, that the land whither I bring you to dwell therein spew you not out. So here God is talking about, remember where the people are headed, or where they think they're headed. They don't get there until 40 years later, but they're headed from Egypt to Israel, their homeland. They're going back home. Israel / Canaan, which is what they called it in this point in the story. They called it Canaan. They were going home to Israel, the promised land, the land that God had promised their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here he's saying, you got to obey. You got to obey. He says that the land, the promised land, whither I bring you to dwell therein, spew you not out. Spew you not out. And of course, spoiler alert, what ends up happening to this group of people eventually? They go into the promised land and and they get spewed out. Eventually they get spewed out. Why? They don't obey. They sin. They do the things they were told not to do. Revelation 21 verse 1, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Why am I reading about this? Well, when the chapter in Revelation 20 comes to an end and we read into chapter 21, this is how it starts out. Okay? When those 1,000 years are over, the 1,000-year reign ends. John says he sees a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. Okay? I don't really know if this is literal or it's just, the heaven and the earth as we knew them, the concept passes away and everything changes, or if they literally just like are incinerated and something new forms. I think it's probably the former. I think that just everything as it was passes away and something very new begins anew, which is the merging of heaven and earth. The New Jerusalem come down. Okay? In the pattern, in the foundational pattern where this nation was heading back to the promised land, God promised that he would cast out the Canaanites that lived there before they entered in. He was going to cast out these people who were rebellers against God. They were practicing all of these things that God says don't do, like child sacrifice and adultery and paganism and worshiping multiple gods and so on and so forth. God was going to cast them out and they were going to march in and inherit the promised land. Okay, this is a foundational pattern for what's coming in the future for you and for me. During that 1,000-year reign, Jesus will have his reign. The people will be subdued into enforced peace. At the end of it, there's going to be, Satan is going to be released. There's going to be a battle. He's going to be tossed into the lake of fire. And then those people are going to be ushered in to what the Bible calls the day of God. And this day of God is our promised land. Okay, it is where we're headed, just like it's where this nation of Israel, they were headed to their promised land, but they had to spend those 40 years in the wilderness unlearning everything that they ever knew. And that's what we're going to do during the 1,000-year reign. We're going to unlearn everything that we're learning in this lifetime. And we're going to learn about God and his goodness, his promises for the future. We're going to study the word of God. We're going to draw near to Jesus, more, nearer than we ever have before. That will be our time of unlearning all of the just cleansing and getting off all of the filth that's on us from this lifetime, so that we can prepare to enter into the real promised land, which is the New Jerusalem. Here, he was warning them that they have to obey. He said, because if you don't, the land is going to spew you out. Okay? The promised land is for obedient people. And the same goes for the fulfillment of all of this foundational stuff. The New Jerusalem is for obedient people. And God is going to prepare us so that when we finally get to that point, the family of God will be holy and obedient and ready to enter into the day of God, so that we won't screw ourselves over and be spewed out of the land. Okay, verse 23, and ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you. And he's talking what I was just talking about. This is the promised land. They haven't entered into Canaan/Israel yet, but when they do, God's going to cast out the inhabitants there. And he says, you shall not walk in the manners of that nation. When you enter into the promised land, you're not going to live like they live. And that's what this time in the wilderness was for. All of the teaching that they're receiving from Moses on how God wants them to live. Ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. He's talking about Canaanites. He's using the past tense here, and I'm not sure why, but he's talking about something that he's going to do, which is cast out the Canaanites before they go in. And it doesn't quite work out that way, but it's because of sin. It's because of sin. It always interrupts and gets in the way of, all the goodness and the promises that God wants for his children. And we see that in our own families, right? On a very micro level. You've got these kids and you want the very, very best for them, and they make poor choices. And then ultimately there's, negative consequences that come with that, because of sin. It all comes down to sin. But I have said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. Okay? Think about this, you guys. Right now, there's a place that you and I call heaven. And there are different sections, the Bible tells us, at least 3 that the Bible talks about. There's kind of God's realm, or his house, his sacred space. There's paradise, right? And there are fallen angels that have access to heaven right now. That's my understanding of it anyway. I know some Christians would disagree with that. They think that the fallen angels were cast out of heaven a long time ago, and heaven's this holy place and there's no evil thing in it. But in the book of Revelation, in chapter 12, if we understand the book of Revelation to be the end time story, which I personally do, this casting out, where this dragon casts a third of his angels from the heavens to the earth with his tail, it hasn't happened yet. It happens in the end times, and it happens in conjunction with the rapture of rapture of the male child, which is the rapture of believers. The rapture. It happens in conjunction with this sign of the dragon, which is when he casts a third of his angels to the earth. Satan and his angels have access to this place we call heaven. I think it's a different section. Okay. I don't think these fallen, wicked, evil angels just get to roam around, God's sacred space. But they have access to a part of heaven, and they're going to be cast out. And then all of heaven, it says in Revelation, is going to celebrate and rejoice because they've been cast out. But here in verse 24, it says, but I have said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you that possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. Here, foundationally, God is promising this nation of Israel that they are going to inherit a land, that God is going to cast out wicked people before they even get in. And I believe that this promise still holds true in the real thing, that this foundational verse is kind of setting the foundation for. What we see in Revelation, in the end time story, is that this place that we think of as heaven, he has to clean it up too. The devil is going to cast out a third of his angels, okay? And then there's going to be a battle in heaven. We see this in Revelation where they lose. That is Satan's followers, the ones that still remain in heaven, because he's only going to cast a third of his to the earth. They lose the battle, and God casts the rest of them to the earth. He's cleaning that place out, that place that you and I know as heaven. Just like we see here in this foundational story where God cleans out the promised land before the nation of Israel goes in. And it didn't happen like in one battle or overnight. It was systematic. But as you can see, it is in the end times too. Satan casts some of his angels to the earth, and then God casts the rest of them to the earth, including Satan. And they're told they no more have access to heaven. So this is something I believe that's in the future. It's on the horizon, this idea that God is going to clean up heaven, right? And then bring the new heaven to merge with the new earth after all of the wicked entities are finally received their justice. Milk and honey, I am the Lord your God, which have separated you from other people. God started foundationally this nation of Israel by separating them out, right? They were the few among the many, right? One nation among many nations. He separated them out and said, you're just going to worship me, and you're going to follow my law, and I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I'm going to bless you abundantly. okay, which have separated you from other people. This nation of Israel was meant to be separate from the rest of this ungodly world. And you and I we're still called to be separate from an ungodly world. We're meant to remember that we belong to God, that He's our God, that we're His child, that we've been marked, right, by the blood of the Lamb and by the Spirit of the living God. We're to remember that we belong to God forevermore. And we are to remember to be faithful to God and to suffer with Christ. Because we're separate. Okay, we're separate. Verse 25, ye shall therefore put difference between clean beasts and unclean, between unclean fowls and clean. Ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by fowl or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. We've looked at this elsewhere in the book of Leviticus, this idea that some animals are clean and some animals are unclean. And the whole point of that, my understanding anyway, is so that people, you and I, we can understand that in God's providence, there's a clean category and there's an unclean category. And that includes people. And we want to be in the clean category, right? And the way we get into that clean category is by the blood of the Lamb. The blood covers us and covers our sin. And then we're indwelt by the Spirit of the living God. Verse 26, and ye shall be holy. Holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that you should be mine. Isn't it awesome? Revelation 22, verse 10, and he saith unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. There's a lot here. I don't fully understand it. I almost feel like this is a predestination verse where it's talking about he that is unjust, let him be unjust still. It's almost as if he's saying there are some people that just are bad. They're unclean. They're filthy. They're wicked. And there are some who are just righteous and holy, or at least they have something that is righteous and holy within them, even if they're, outwardly seem like bad people. And that's what, that great white throne judgment, the second resurrection of all those souls at the end of the 1,000-year reign, their future is going to be determined there at that great white throne judgment. If there's anything redeemable about these people who died in their sin without the atoning blood of Christ, if there's anything redeemable, they're going to look at their works, right? Is what it says. Their lives are going to be looked at. They can't be judged based on the blood of Christ because they don't have it. They're going to be judged on their life. Okay? It says, behold, I come quickly, my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. He that is righteous, let him be righteous. He that is holy, let him be holy still. And then the final verse, I think this is really interesting here, actually. There's two verse 26 and 27 are the final two verses here in chapter 20. Verse 26, I'm going to read it again. It's a perfect wrap-up verse to end a chapter. It's perfect. It says, and ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine. Sounds like a good way to end a chapter, right? But there's one more verse. I find this very interesting. And it really almost feels like this verse should be up here with all this other stuff that it's talking about. Why it wraps it up with this verse, it's almost like a P.S. P.S. A man also, or woman, that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. So this little P.S. here, it's like, oh, and by the way, let's get back to this idea of familiar spirits and wizards. This is demon-possessed people. Okay. They shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. Okay. Remember the why to all of this. We got to go clear back up to verse 14, that there be no wickedness among you. So when we start to feel like, gosh, God's, his consequences sure are harsh. Stoning people, it's not their fault they're possessed by a demon. That's kind of the way we start to think. God says, no, they have to be put to death, that there be no wickedness among you. Revelation chapter 14, verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So I do want to talk about this just for a moment, and then I'm going to go. Foundationally, this one little verse here, it's talking about people who are indwelt with a wicked, or let's just say demonic spirit. Okay? And God's saying if they are among you back here foundationally, saying to kill them, saying to stone them. Okay? In the end times, in the book of Revelation, one of the things we see, we just read partially about it, is we see this false prophet making it so that there is this image that people are to worship, along with worshiping the beast, along with taking this mark, right? And this is enforced. This is, you do it or you can't buy or sell. This image, I've talked a little bit about it before. I don't know what it is. People have speculated about this so-called image all throughout history. I've shared kind of my thinking on it, and I'll share it again. What seems to be on the horizon, just by looking at current events, looking at current technology, and this idea of merging humans with technology, merging humans with machine, merging humans with a hive mind, doing some sort of insert, some sort of a chip that would allow you to not have to look things up on your phone, but it's just in your head. It's in your brain, right? You can access the World Wide Web. You can access the hive mind, right? And during the end times, if Satan, or not Satan, but the beast is the leader of the world, right? The global president of the world. And he has this system that he unrolls that involves this mark on the, the right hand or in the head that you have to have in order to buy and sell. It makes sense to me that this will be some sort of technology that will cause people who volunteer, that want to be a part of this system, volunteer to say, you know what, I want to be indwelt. I want to be indwelt with this thing. And how that will play out and look like, I don't know. I mean, I think about it. There are some ideas that I have. It's quite possible they have to lay down their life and be killed and then be brought back to life with this new technology inside of them. Because the image, when God made us in his image, we are a reflection of God. And this image that is going to be created in the end times, it's Satan is creating it, or ultimately it's the beast. But the beast is a merged human / something, fallen angels, the beast is a man. The Bible tells us it's a man, and that he died and then he comes back to life, right? And he somehow indwelt with this Apollyon, this head, this king of these underground fallen angels that are released. So this man, this earthly man, is somehow going to be merged with this Apollyon, either through technology or through some sort of spiritual indwelling. I don't know. I think technology is going to be a big part of it. And I think foundationally what we're looking at here, at this final verse, it's talking about someone who has a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard. And this word wizard, once again, it's a conjurer, it's a ghost. It's being possessed. It's an idea of a person who is possessed. And here we see the foundation of this in God's teaching here to the nation of Israel and in the book of Revelation. We see the mention of this so-called image that people have to worship. So, I mean, that's what I think about that. I could be right. I could be wrong. Time will tell. All right. So God bless everyone. I pray. I just want to pray for all of us now that God just gives us the strength to be obedient to Him, that He gives us the courage to stand in our faith as separate in a world, the few among the many. And I do believe there's going to be a massive revival. We see it in the pages of Revelation. There's going to be a massive revival, and people that you might think are among, the godless today are going to be among the godly later. So that's really, really good news. But for the here and now, I just pray that God give you courage to stand and to remember that you belong to God. I pray that God give you the strength to be obedient in all things. It's not always easy to be obedient in the things that God has called us to be obedient in. Some are easier, some are harder. Pray that God is giving us the strength to do that. And I pray that as we go forward, we've got a new year starting up here soon. I pray that God give you a newfound hope and a newfound strength. I continue to ask that He is providing for all of your needs supernaturally, whatever those may be. And I just pray that He strengthen your faith. Lord, please just strengthen our faith. Help us, Lord, to believe. Help us, Lord, to be in your will, and help us to suffer with you, Lord Jesus. So, all right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. God bless.